Excellent!
What's up guys, how's it going? Today's video is going to be all about overclocking non-overclockable Intel processors, specifically Skylake processors. And if you're wondering how that's done, well, first off you need a Z170 motherboard similar to this one. This is a Z170 Extreme4, which I'm going to use to demo overclocking. Well, not this CPU. This is a 6600K. This one is unlocked, so you could easily do a multiplier overclock on this. What I want to get is something that gives us a little more bang for our buck, hopefully. Something that's still a quad core, something that still will make for a very nice gaming system. For that I'm going to go for an i5-6500, but I don't have one, so let's go to Micro Center. Glorious Micro Center. See if they're playing any of Jay's videos again. 6600Ks, 6100s, there's the 6500. That's weird. They have the retail pricing on them, right?
Yeah, they have retail pricing on them.
Okay, that's why. Such a big healthy stack of Hyper 212 Evos. I mean, I might as well get one. Success. What's in the bag? I managed to get away with just the 6. Oh god, it's bright out here. I showed great self-restraint and I only came out with that Hyper 212 and the 6500. That should be all I need for today. Okay, I managed to make it back. I got my 6500, got my Z170 Extreme4 from ASRock out of the box here. I was just taking a look. I figured let's go over this really quickly before I move on. ASRock actually sent this motherboard over directly so that I could use it to demonstrate the BCLK overclocking with non-K Intel Skylake processors. So thank you ASRock for that. I also wanted to point out that ASRock is not the only one with this capability. ASUS, Supermicro were two of the other sort of originators along with those were the three kind of first to sort of bring this to the forefront. I don't know who was absolutely first, but I heard it first from ASRock, so put it that way. MSI and EVGA have also followed suit, and I believe Gigabyte will be as well. So pretty much all of the motherboard manufacturers are able to enable this simply by giving you a BIOS update for the motherboard. Now, there's a couple things to point out here. One is that the BIOS update is not typically available directly via the standard ways you go, like, you know, go to the motherboard webpage on ASRock's website, go to the download, find your BIOS and download it. You've got to download it from a special place. That's because it does a couple things to the motherboard, and I want to point those out before I dive into this. One is that it's going to disable turbo and C states for your processor, which isn't a huge deal to a lot of people who only care about how fast is it and that kind of thing. But if power consumption is a concern of yours, it's definitely something to keep in mind. One probably more important thing to keep in mind is that this is going to disable the iGPU when you load up that BIOS. So you're going to need a discrete graphics card. You're not going to be able to use the iGPU along with this overclocking method. That said, here is a look at the board, and the Z170 Extreme4 is part of the Extreme series, so it's definitely not quite as budget oriented as like their Pro line is. Although this is more of a budget series, so the Extreme series there's like a 3, a 4, a 7, there's a 6 and a 7. This one goes for about $145 US as of the time of this video, and there was also a $20 mail-in rebate, so down to $125 after that mail-in rebate, so you can get this fairly inexpensive. You do have a couple by 16 PCI Express slots right there, so you can do two-way GPU configurations. They're triple slot spaced. I thought that was kind of nice. It's got a pretty much all black look. There's some copper accents on some of the heatsink, or not the heat sinks, but this little shroud right here. This is a plastic shroud, by the way. It has a Purity Sound logo on it, and then the rest of the heat sinks are made of metal, but they're fairly minimalist. I mean, fairly, you know, they're not too gaudy or anything like that. So you can see that sort of shinier ASRock logo again with the copper color, and then there's gold caps also kind of scattered across the board. Looking at the upper edge, we can see the VRM heat sinks that are at the top right here, and this was actually part of the reason why I chose this board. I wanted something that wasn't crazy expensive. I definitely didn't want a top-of-the-line $200, $250 plus overclocking board, but the power delivery is important when it comes to Skylake Z170 or Skylake processors and overclocking. So this has a 10-phase power delivery. These are Nichicon 12K gold caps in there as well, and definitely not the best when it comes to overclocking, but certainly better than a lot of the more bare bones, say $100 and less Z170 options that are out there. You also of course have 4 RAM slots, which is pretty nice to have, and then there's some other kind of little bonus features, like you got a power and reset surface mounted right there. You've got a debug LED, which is nice to have. SATA Express on all these, which are they making SATA Express drives? I feel like they must have given up on that. You also have an Ultra M.2 port right there, PCI Express Gen 3 by 4, which is definitely very nice to have. It's not in my favorite position since it's right below the primary graphics card slot, so that will be blocked by your GPU. Actually, very much of a concern if you're considering water cooling with this board, but there's probably not a whole lot of people considering that. Lastly, here's the I.O., and hey, a PS2 port, I don't mind that. It's a combo port too. You got 6 USB 3.0 ports here, here, and here, and here. You also have all the connectors for your iGPU, including a full-size DisplayPort and HDMI. You've got your integrated NIC right there, which is, I believe, Intel-based. And then you also have your 5.1 surround audio. And then they've added on a USB 3.1 controller there, and they're giving you a Type-C connector as well as a Type-A connector. And USB 3.1 is nice. It's super fast. I think that is quite enough talking for now, though. Let me get this all put together, and then I will start overclocking. So as test setups go, everything came together pretty easily here. I've got the Hyper 212 installed on top of the 6500. I've got the memory video card storage in place, and I actually spent a couple hours last night going through, just messing around with stuff and trying out the overclocking capabilities of this configuration. So yeah, full disclosure, it is Friday morning now, but I am happy to say that I was able to overclock my 6500K. I settled in on just over 4.2 gigahertz for the overclock. But let me quickly give you a closer look at this setup before I move on. So here's the flip side, and coming over here to memory, you will see that I have G.Skill. This is Ripjaws 5, and this is 3200 speed rated memory. I'm not running it at 3200, but I wanted memory that was fast enough to keep up with some potential weird overclocking numbers that might be thrown at it, since we are doing BCLK adjustment, which is going to affect the CPU frequency as well as the memory frequency, although fortunately not much else. For graphics card, I just dropped in a 980 Ti. That's because it was sitting there to my right and it was available. I know I'm matching some high-end hardware up here with this, guys, but this is really just purely for testing and overclocking purposes. 980 Ti is there though, and then the Plextor M6E is sitting in there just below it for our main operating system. Lastly, just so you guys can see what I'm doing, I have this HDMI cable going out of my graphics card and into my Elgato Game Capture HD60, and then that's being captured by my capture system, and that is how I'm able to, well, see what's going on this screen over here, but then also see and capture stuff over there, which I'm showing you guys too much behind the scenes stuff right now. Let's anyway though, we're in the operating system, and let me just show you guys the default specs for the 6500. So up here, i5-6500, core voltage is going to be jumping around because right now all those little power saving functions are still in place. Core speed is going to be jumping a little bit. It's going up to like 3.4, and then it's resting down when it's idling and that sort of stuff at a lower frequency. I did notice that the bus speed is a little bit higher than it should be. It's at 100.83, which is why we're seeing some slightly weirder numbers here. But ultimately what you have here is a core speed of 3200 megahertz, and then this processor will automatically overclock itself depending on how many cores are being used. So we'll go up to 3.6 on a single core. If it's using 2 cores, it'll go up to 3.5. If it's using 3 cores, it'll go to 3.4. And if it's using all 4 cores, it'll only do 3.3. So only a 100 megahertz boost over what was there before. You can see that also reflected over here on hardware monitor, where we can see the V-core, for example, at 1.184. Note here that apart from the voltages, we can also see all of our core temperatures. And then as we move a little bit further down here, we can see the actual clock speed. So this has been topping out again on a single core at 3.6 gigahertz or so, but that it's also underclocking itself down to 800 when it is idle. Okay, next up I need to restart and show you guys what's going on in the BIOS. So as I've been going through all the overclocking, I've made use of a couple features of this motherboard. One is the fact that there is a dual BIOS switch right there. So I just switched back over to my overclock setting. The other thing that I was making use of is the clear CMOS, which is actually a button over here on this side. When I would start an overclock and then I would get a hang or it would stop responding or whatever, I would basically hold down the power switch until the system shut off. Then I would turn off the power on the power supply over here, hit the power again to flush all the power that's out of the system, and then flip everything back on, and then generally it would start up again. If that wasn't working, which only happened one or twice as I was trying some more outlandish things, then I would do all that, and with the power supply turned off, hold in the clear CMOS button for about 5 seconds. That clears everything and resets it back to default on the BIOS that you're set to, and then you can kind of go back and key in your overclocks again. Fortunately, I didn't really have to do that more than once or twice, but I was getting some pretty frequent lockups when it comes to attempting higher overclocks. I was going for 4.4, 4.5, and this processor wasn't really able to hit it. Bear that in mind when you're overclocking CPUs. It's a shot in the dark how far your CPU might be able to overclock. Some of them do better, some of them do worse. This one happened to do pretty decently, I think. But anyway, on a typical startup, I would reset. Oh gosh, I didn't hit that clear CMOS. No, I didn't. What the hell's going on? That was weird. Okay. So on a typical startup, I'd reboot, and then as it's booting up, you tap delete, and that's how you get into the BIOS. So here's the BIOS from ASRock. They have a graphical layout. You can use your mouse to navigate around. And you'll notice here in the top left, the version I'm using is 2.61. That's not currently available directly from the ASRock website. It's available in the beta download section, or you can find direct downloads for certain places. They're actually only on 2.4 right now. But thanks to ASRock for preloading this BIOS up for me. I thought that was nice. Anyway, apart from that, we can get a first glance at stuff like the DRAM that's installed and what it's running at, and if the XMP profile is on, what storage is in there. I have the fan set to silent now, which is actually pretty nice and quiet. And I'm happy to announce that that was actually functional when I was running some tests on this just now. Alright, so we're going to go into advanced mode, and that's how you do the overclock in here. Again, we see a layout of kind of what the motherboard is and CPU and all that good stuff. OC Tweaker is where we're going to be doing our OC tweaking. And here up at the top, you can see the settings that I went for. So I finished on 4.22 gigahertz. There's also the cache speed, which also ramps up. My base clock or BCLK speed is 131.875. And I did that so that 4220 would be a nice round number. Memory is running at just over 2800. So let me just kind of run through and show you guys what I did. First off, I went to DRAM, and I was initially playing with the XMP settings. What you should do probably is go in here, tell it to use XMP settings, but then, which I can do right here, there's a profile one. I'm not going to mess with it right now, but once you tell it to do XMP settings, it's going to try to set your DRAM frequency. In the case of this memory to 3200, I didn't want to do that. So after it was set, you can go in here specifically and tell it what frequency you want to run at. I'd recommend sticking between 2133 and maybe 2600-ish or so. I was able to be pretty stable at 2800, so that's what I went with. But this is kind of where I would start out. After you've done that, go back, and then we will go into the voltage configuration. Voltage is one of those things that you just need more of if you're looking at overclocking one of these lower-end CPUs. Simply put, you're going to be increasing the TDP, theoretically. You're going to be generating more heat. In order to do that, you need to tell it, give me more voltage. I'm at 1.35 right now, although I was messing with 1.325. 1.325 for Sandy Bridge processors is a good starting out point. You might range up to 1.35, even 1.36, 1.37. If you notice in your operating system as you're running benchmark tests and putting a load on the system that you're hitting 1.4 or above, I'd dial it back. You probably don't want to sit at over 1.4 volts with these CPUs. And also bear in mind with voltage, I'm specifically talking about the Skylake CPUs here because voltage tolerances tend to vary a bit from CPU to CPU. Anyway, set it to fixed mode instead of auto or offset, and tell it, well, 1.35 in this situation, but I would say start off with 1.325 and then only add a little bit more if you need it. Finally, the CPU configuration, and here's where the rubber meets the road, or so to speak. And again, I'm not doing a whole lot of advanced settings in here. I'm pretty much mainly just messing with the BCLK frequency. And here I started off at, well, I did 110 first, and then I was like, that's boring. And then I went to 120, and then I went to 130. At 130 I was stable. Tried to go to 140, which what does 140 even do if I key it in here? 140 gives us almost a 4.5 gigahertz overclock, as you can see up here, 4.48. But that was not stable, so I ended up dialing it back, and I've just completely lost the number I even had set in there. That's okay. The nice thing about this is you can use the plus and minus to actually adjust. So I'm just going to hold minus down to roll ourselves back down to 4.22? Yeah. And that'll get us all the way back down here. Now, one last thing you should do before you restart and load into your operating system and see if it's stable is double check your target memory speed. It's going to be reflected here, and if this is too high or if it's higher than you'd want it to go, again, just jump back over to DRAM configuration, use the DRAM frequency drop down here, and set it manually to what you want it to be at. Once you've done all of that, hit F10, save and exit. It'll restart, go back into the operating system, and you should be all set to go. Now, again, this is very much a your mileage may vary situation when it comes to what motherboard you're using. I'm using an ASRock motherboard. If you're doing this on an MSI or a Gigabyte or an ASUS or an EVGA, the interface is going to look different. Some of the labelings of things might look a little bit different, but the basic stuff I talked about as far as BCLK and as far as what else? The memory, as far as all those labels should be roughly the same, so you should be able to figure out what's going on. Okay, so we're back in Windows. So this is Windows 8, and as you can see, or hopefully as you can see, we have a successful overclock. Let me zoom in. Okay. So on CPU-Z, you can see the bus speed is at 131.8-ish. Core speed is at about 4220, and it's going to fluctuate here and there just a little bit. Multipliers at 32. So here's where you can see maybe more directly the difference between overclocking via bus speed and overclocking via multiplier. Overclocking via multiplier is what you would do if you had like a 6600K or one of the K SKUs that was unlocked. Multiplier overclocking is simply taking a bus speed of which usually is 100. Granted, you can do both, but usually the bus speed's 100 times your multiplier. So multiplier of 44, for example, with a bus speed of 100 would be 4.4 gigahertz or 4400 megahertz for the overclock. In this case, we're leaving the multiplier locked because it is locked and we can't touch it, which is in this case at 32. And bear that in mind, when you're overclocking, it's going to be, when you're BCLK overclocking, it's going to be adjusting that based on the base multiplier of the CPU, not the turbo multiplier. So taking a bus speed of 131 times 32 gives us our overall overclock of 4220-ish. We also, of course, are working on 4 cores and 4 threads. So let me point out some of the other quirks, though, of this overclocking method, because I will say there was a few of them that, I don't know, they were funny. I was hoping I wouldn't have to deal with quirks, but anyway, here's our V-core, which is at 1.34, actually just slightly below the 1.35 that we set it to, so that's cool. Also, we can see system temperatures, but if we scroll down, there is no actual temperature listings on our i5-6500 here. We can see, sorry, it's jumpy. We can see voltages, we can see powers, clocks, utilizations, but we can't see the temperature. It's weird. It's weird when overclocking. I kind of got used to it. It's a little bit more like overclocking in the dark. Often when you're overclocking, you wanna take a look at your temperature, because when you see like, hey, I'm hitting 90, 95 degrees Celsius, that's too hot. So this was a little bit stranger since you can't see the temperature of your CPU, and that's just one of the things that goes along with this overclocking method, since it's not really like fully Intel sanctioned. I didn't run into too many issues as far as I could tell. I was sitting here right next to it, and I have a general idea based on past experience, like how hot like a heatsink's getting based on the CPU. And these CPUs are lower TDPs overall, which means chances are they're not going to get that hot. But something to bear in mind. Also notice here for our clocks, what they are at right now is this column. This is the lowest, and this is the highest. So you'll notice that turbo boost is not taking effect. We have 4215 and 4220 for our minimum and max clock speed. So it's always going to be running at that higher frequency. As far as power consumption, that means that you're going to use more power, but it's not the end of the world for sure. And but again, just one of those little quirks and something to keep in mind when you're doing this. After I got booted up into the operating system, after dialing in my overclock, loading up CPU-Z and a little bit of hardware monitor to kind of keep an eye on things, I was just using Cinebench
in order to run through it and kind of validate very quickly if everything was stable. Fortunately, most of my instability came upon boot up. When I actually did boot into the operating system, I haven't had any issues with instability so far. Going through a single run of Cinebench is not necessarily a full load burn-in test. I would want to take something like Prime 95 and run it overnight to make sure everything was nice and stable. But by and large, if you can get through a Cinebench run, you're probably going to be okay. Down here, though, you can see what kind of performance increase I got, at least with Cinebench, by doing my overclock. So at the bottom is the baseline score of 548. That's right here, and that's running at default frequency. And then I have several other i5-6500 tests that you can see right here. This is the 4.22 gigahertz overclock right here. I know Cinebench doesn't show that, but trust me, it is. We got up to 689 points, and that was an increase of about 26% overall when comparing the overclock speed to the non-overclock speed. Pretty nice, I would say, but ultimately I'm still left a little bit torn, I guess. What I wanted to do with this entire project was come to you guys and say, here's a list of parts, here's a computer you can put together, here's a few fairly simple steps you can take to get yourself up and running and get yourself more bang for the buck. That's what it's always about, more for your money. It's a little bit more complicated than I had hoped. It's definitely not crazy complicated like if we go back to, overclocking in the 90s or anything like that. But there are some quirks and some things that just make it a little bit less accessible for somebody, especially who has never built a computer before. What I think this video warrants is another follow-up video with some additional testing. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to split this into another part. What I want to do next is first get that 6600K installed in here and see how I'm testing and scoring compared to that. I want to run some more benchmarks apart from Cinebench. I want to do some gaming tests and see what kind of actual gaming improvements we're getting, also comparing to the 6600K. And just kind of show, if you want to go this route, it's a little bit more niche. It takes a little bit more effort after the fact. You got to do a little bit of tweaking and tuning with the overclocking. Overclocking is always, a variable as well. You never know exactly what you're going to get. I got to 4.2 here pretty stably. A lot of other people who I've been reading articles for online have hit 4.4 and above, but it depends on how much voltage you're willing to drop into it. Depends on your cooling solution. I'm using a very effective but also budget-oriented cooling solution here. So all of those things kind of play a part. Anyway, though, I'm going to follow this video up, I promise, next week with some more testing, some more benchmarking. So let me know in the comment section down below what, if anything, in particular you would like me to test out on this rig. If you have any other suggestions for things you want to see me do with this configuration to give you guys some better ideas of what you can do when it comes to getting those less expensive Skylake processors and overclocking them. Last thing I wanted to point out is that I went with the 6500, but a lot of the actual benchmarks and other tests I've seen going on online in the past month or so have said a 6400 might be a better bet. I like both of those processors because they're actual quad cores and they're the cheapest full quad cores you can get in the Skylake lineup. So I might even go for a 6400 and see how that goes. Maybe just kind of see if I get a better luck of the draw when it comes to the kind of overclocks I'm able to achieve. Anyway, though, guys, I know I've rambled a lot in this video, but I get excited about this stuff. There's lots to test, there's lots of potential, there's lots of variables to account for. So again, let me know in the comment section down below what you think I should be doing for the follow-up for this video. Thanks so much for watching this one. Hit the like button too while you're at it. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe to my channel for more stuff just like this, and we'll see you next time.